welcome to our event, Making Your Business Less Dependent on You and Easier to Sell. Today's event is sponsored by Warner Solicitors and Harris Buyers, M&A, who we've had the pleasure of working with over the last few years on supporting businesses through sale. So before we begin, can I just have a quick bit of your time in terms of notepads and pens are on your chairs. It's a very cute point because you are twice likely to take action if you write it down, and we are confident you will have some nuggets to write down this morning, so please do make notes. We are filming, as we do with all our events, so you can all feel free to load the camera, but it will also go out to you and our wider audience. Put our phones on silent, please, because it is good to just have a little bit of time to focus on your business rather than being in chaos of being in. So your speakers today are Malcolm Palmer, founder of A4G, and has been my mentor for the last 26 years. I am Emma White. I'm now one of the co-managing partners at A4G from March 24, and I've been with A4G 26 years. So who are A4G? We might look like a funny little bunch, but I always refer to us as a bit of a dysfunctional family. They are certainly a team that care and are very passionate about supporting businesses. So we always say it's all about the advice, not just the numbers, and we do pride ourselves in helping support businesses getting the right information for them to make those easy day-to-day decisions. So we like to think of ourselves as advisors first and chartered accountants second, providing comprehensive support from basic compliance, looking at supporting clients with the overall building of wealth, personal and business, because we all know we need to grow our personal wealth as well, and actually helping business grow and navigate the challenges of that. So in my 26 years, we have grown from 8 members of staff to 60, so I do feel like I've lived this subject through my career. And as I said, Malcolm's founder of A4G. I've overseen 30 years of uninterrupted growth. He obviously originally employed myself at 18 and Josh as we are joint managing partners. So we obviously didn't do too badly, did we? And he wrote the book, Making Your Business Less Dependent on You. So I'm sure there'll be an opportunity for you to get the book, but we're going to give you a bit of a whistle-stop tour this morning.
Good. Thank you, Ellen. So, well, first of all, congratulations to everyone who made it today, because probably the clients that needed to come to this event the most are the ones that were least likely to, because their business is too dependent on them. So this was sort of has been a passion of mine for the whole of my career, really, and the book that I always wanted to write. Today, what we're going to do is talk through what type of business owner you are, how to make your business less dependent on you, and also just go through the process of selling up. So the first question to ask is, what type of business owner are you? Now, there are two extremes of business. In the one extreme, you've got what I call the Elton, like this chap here. So an Elton is the star performer in the business. They're the one that earn most of the money that the business makes. So the one thing that Elton John doesn't do is train up lots of other little Elton Johns to go all around the country singing Goodbye Yellow Brick Road on a Saturday night. He is the star performer, and he's the one that makes the money. The business, if you can call it business, is too dependent on him to be sold. So you need to charge high prices. I think there's a little model that suggests that the most profitable businesses are in the bottom of the top quartile price-wise. But if you're an Elton, you probably need to be even higher than that. You want to be the best of the best within your industry. And after that, you've got to invest those profits wisely. So we've got lots of Eltons within our client base. There's nothing wrong with being an Elton, but you need to have the right pension advice. You need to be squirreling stuff away in other investments. Because being an Elton on its own might it's not going to be enough to retire unless you've got those investments. So for those of our clients who are not at that very high price levels, whose profits are not that high, maybe they need to think about being a little bit less of an Elton and being a little bit more of what we call the Ronald.
So I think we all can probably guess that the Ronald mindset is that growth model where we focus on sort of growing the business and being consistent at delivery. So your typical Ronald sort of sit in the background with little focus on customers, because what they're looking to do is just hone processes. Obviously, their role is more of managing, motivating and leading the business, developing new ideas, making, obviously a better work-life balance, because the business can operate without that one individual. It can step all the way. I mean, we all know, don't we can get McDonald's chips anywhere in the world that are exactly the same. So it is that consistency. And obviously that is a business, so it's proven is much easier to sell and then apply value. So I'd like to start with a show of hands on where you think you might be on the Ronald pension scale. So can you put your hands up if you consider yourself more of a Ronald? Brilliant. What about if you feel you're more Elton than Ronald? Excellent. Well, I think we typically find that a lot of businesses are somewhere in the middle. They'd like to strive to be a bit more Ronald, but sometimes it's just difficult, isn't it, passing those processes down and trusting those that we're given to do it exactly the way we'd like to do. I know the perfect scenario of any employee is to be able to train yourself. So, to be more Ronald, you need to obviously try and make your business less dependent on you. And to start that, you look at assessing the problem within. So I'd like you just to, and this might be when you use your notepads, just start to think about how many hours are you working with people week. I think most of my clients would often say too many. Do you have enough staff be able to take a week's holiday without spending the whole time on a laptop? So as I said, that's just the start of the thought process about where you are on that scale. And then how many different roles do you personally do? I think that's one of the first things we work with clients on, is assessing all the little areas of business that are solely reliant on sort of their decision making. So if this feels a bit like you, this is a good step to take, is where do you sit amongst the business, and consider all the roles, and then often your ops director, your marketing director, your customer complaints, your sometimes admin because you get the mill. And I think actually Peter, who is with us today, he would agree with me that this can be quite a barrier to sale. And actually he supported one of our clients in helping with that.
Yeah, that's right. The particular person we're thinking of being approached by about 70 businesses to sell, because there wasn't a succession plan in place and you couldn't see the way through. There was no interest. So I actually did a succession scheme for him plan, and within a couple of months they actually sold the business internally. I recognised who was able to step up to the mark. So,
absolutely, and I think what actually happens as part of that process is they realised there was some really untapped talent amongst their team, and actually the best value they were getting from sale was to do a management buyout. So everyone sort of took that responsibility and was elevated.
Yeah, so there is no right or wrong answer about that Ronald down scale, and Emma and I are on that scale, and obviously as I get a little bit older and help more and more clients through the sale process, I'm getting a little bit nearer to the to Ronald. And when you're in your prime of your business, building up the clients, that's when you've got to be significantly healthy. So the second stage of making your business less dependent on you is to start taking control. And the first thing that you need to think about is your attitude to the relationship between profit and growth. And what I mean by that is that for some people, growth is more important, and for some people, profit is more important. And for many of you, there's a trade-off between the two. So let me just show you that in a little bit of graphical form. So this would be a typical business owner in that in the short term, you are prepared to sacrifice some profit in order to achieve growth. So what that line on there represents is your I'm neither happy nor unhappy with this situation. So my profit is going down a little bit, but my growth is at a good level. So I'm happy with that gentle trade-off. Now, that's not forever, of course. So people are growing if the profits don't increase in the long term. In the short term, I'm prepared to sacrifice a little bit of profit for growth. And a lot of people aren't prepared to do that. In fact, the paradox of business is that when you are at your most frantic, at your most busy, that is when you're probably at your most profitable. Everybody in the organisation is going flat out and the profits are great. But actually that's unsustainable. Things will start to go wrong if you try and work at that sort of flat out pace. And if you think back to a time in your business when everything was going, there may have been some external reason coming back out of COVID or just a boom in your industry, there will be a time when your profits were at their height, but that won't go on forever. Employees will get fed up, people will make mistakes. One of my clients forgot to renew some insurance and had a burglary, and all their equipment was stolen and they weren't insured. So you've got to understand the relationship between profit and growth. So this is somebody that's a really high desire for profit. And actually, as you'll see, they're not really prepared to reduce their profits in order to achieve much growth. And that might be somebody who's in the latter part of their career. They're not bothered about growth anymore. They just want to get good profits, squirrel them away as best they can. Now this is somebody that has a high desire for growth. If, for the slightly older faces in the audience, if you go back to the early noughties, there were loads of articles in the business press about this company who had never made a profit, who lost money for 7 years and had a stock market valuation that was higher than Sainsbury's. And the general consensus was, this is mad. Why would anybody buy shares in this company that isn't making a profit? Well, that company was Amazon. And the reason the wise people recognised that those losses, that this company was taking market share, and that would eventually turn into profits. So that's the sort of business that has a real high desire for growth, and even prepared to make losses in order to achieve that high growth.
And obviously the other area that in terms of taking control of is, as a business owner, is being really disciplined about your time management. You start by looking at putting it into a table of what important, yes, no, urgent, yes, no. So you have the 4 quadrants of time management. Now, most people spend about 30% of their time in the urgent, important stuff. I always think of that, we're running around with the cable on fixing everything, but that is firefighting mode. 10% of their time in the important but not urgent, and that is the planning for the future and ensuring that stuff doesn't fall into the fire category. And then about 50% of their time in the urgent but actually not important in terms of the draw on their time, and about 10% in the really they shouldn't be doing any of that at this stage. But high achievers, the high achievers, is they spend none of their time in the not urgent, not important. So they've cut all the rubbish, you know, unsubscribe to anything that doesn't need to be in their inbox. They don't need to make decisions on how many bottles of milk you buy for the office because that's not important. All of that's being cut. They spend 60% of their time working on the stuff that is highly important but not urgent. And that is a growth phase where you are focusing on the future, the processes, the systems and the building, but it's not urgent. And then 30% of the time, yes, it's urgent but not important, and only 10% of their time in that what I call chaos mode. Now, obviously to do that, to be able to work in that quadrant where you're 60% important, not urgent, we always talk about the fact that you should set the hairs running early. Because quite often the blocker to doing things like that is finding the time to do it, but also identifying something important but not urgent as a project, actually planning what needs to be done in that project. Because without a plan, you'll end up having to do it all yourself and it's all in your head. Whereas once you've got a draft plan and an objective, you can help get members of your team to buy into that. So highlight the aspects that could be delegated. I think once you've put a good plan together, you'll be surprised by how much can be delegated and then just overseeing it yourself. We are a huge fan of dictation because actually verbally you will express much more detail than you will typing, and it's quicker. And it makes it much easier to delegate. And then obviously you've got to look around your organisation and find someone who can do most, maybe not all, but most of it. And it just starts the project moving. And I think we all know with things, if you can start things moving, it gets traction. Set the hairs running early.
So the next thing that you need to do is to develop a recruitment strategy. And so many businesses don't actually have a recruitment strategy. It's all a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction. One of my clients, I'm just scanning them to make sure they're not here now. So one of my clients had 5 employees. Let me just get it right. I think it was his mum, his girlfriend, who lived about 200 miles away, his brother, his stepbrother, and I forgot the other one. I think the other one might have been a family friend. And I did say to him in a meeting, I said, "Do you think you've got trust issues?" And which he laughed at. He said, "Yeah, people are point." But so many businesses fail to get a proper recruitment strategy. And A4G, our recruitment strategy, kind of started by accident about 6 months in when I took on the first trainee, and then the following year I took on another trainee, next year another trainee, and then it started to grow from there. I think Emma was the first year we took 2 trainees on, and you kicked the other trainee into touch fairly early, didn't you? So, and this year we've just taken 5 new trainees. The first time we've ever done that, and all of these the young faces that I met for the first time yesterday around the office. But it's important that your business has a recruitment strategy. And I would say that there are 2 types of recruitment strategy. The first one is to engage in a talent war. And this is what a lot of businesses get sucked into, that they are in competition for members of staff that know what they're doing, that can hit the ground running, that can come in and on day one will do a good job for you. The other alternative is to play what we call Moneyball. So how many of you have read the book Moneyball? How many of you have seen the film Moneyball? Okay, all right. Brad Pitt plays the star of the role in Moneyball. Okay, a few people know what's going on. So the story of Moneyball is about a team called the Oakland A's baseball team, who were the low-level teams, didn't have the finances to compete for players, but came up with a strategy to identify talent that wasn't being recognised by the other teams. So sport is where the Moneyball philosophy has flourished, but it's now starting to find its way into other aspects of business. So the key to Moneyball recruitment is to find talent that's undervalued. Now, I just thought I'd just give you a couple of examples. Are there any Manchester United fans in?
Unfortunately.
Okay, all right. Sorry, guys. Are there any Brentford fans in? Less likely. Let's just compare a couple of things. So Manchester United, you all know who they are. Their most expensive signings before the start of the summer, Paul Pogba, 105 million, a guy called Anthony, 95 million, Harry Maguire, Jadon Sancho, Romelu Lukaku, huge transfer fees, right? They are trying to buy talent. In fact, the number of signings that they had that were over £30 million is 38 in the history. Now, alternatively, Brentford play this money ball. They look for talent that is undervalued. Their most expensive signings, a guy called Igor Thiago, Nathan Collins, Kevin Sade, they haven't signed anybody over £33 million. And yet the league table last season looks like it's... So, this tiny little club from West London that has been in the top division of the Premier League, coming 5 places higher than one of the biggest clubs in the entire world because of the Moneyball recruitment strategy.
Can we laugh at where Tottenham were before we go?
We can. The Arsenal fans in the room. So, in your industry, not every industry is the same, but in your industry there will be people that are undervalued. And typically there are 3 types of those. The first one is apprentices. So, we have watched some of our, well, I've watched many people grow up, but the first few months, some of our trainees haven't quite adapted to not being in school, and for some reason the young guys, because they're
3:30, you see them start. So.
3:30 they're ready to get their satchel and go home to mum, but no, still 2 hours to go. So because a lot of businesses are not prepared to go through that pain barrier, and perhaps they just haven't got somebody on board who's prepared to take apprentices under their wing and give them the training. So as a result, there are all these enthusiastic and potentially talented young people that could be working for your business that are available because other people aren't employing them. The second category of people that are undervalued are part-timers, because again, so many business owners feel that a part-timer is not going to work within their organisation. Oh, you've got to be there at 9, you need to be there at the end of the day in case this, in case that. If you can organise the business in such a way that somebody can do that job part-time, then again, there are lots of really talented people out there. Now, most of the people that want part-time are perhaps coming back after a career break from having children, and then are struggling to find a job which was at the same level as they did before. So if you can create a job within your organisation that can be done part-time, if it can be done from 9:30 to 2:30, that is the sweet spot. You will get lots of really good applicants for that position. And the last one is offshore, because everybody is frightened of employing anybody offshore because they feel that they need to be looking over their shoulder, even though they let half their team work from home for part of the week already, and we all managed to survive through COVID with everyone as well. So those are 3 big areas where you've got people that are undervalued in most industries. So we use, for our offshoring, we have a little company involved in called Durban Offshoring. We picked Durban because, for a few reasons really, salaries are about 50 to 60% at UK levels, there's no employer's national insurance, Durban's got an excellent education system, English is the first language for over 50% of people in Durban. The professional qualifications are extraordinarily similar in South Africa to the UK, which is basically because we all kind of come from the same set of laws 100 years ago, and it's amazing how little they diverge over the years, so therefore the professional qualifications end up being the same. There's 28% unemployment, so lots of people, and actually the people you might recruit there are not actually coming from the unemployed section. They're normally people that are in jobs that are at a much lower level than their qualifications would normally put. Very similar time zone, 1 hour difference in the summer, 2 hours in the winter, sorry. And as one of my clients said, the Durban accent is easy on the middle class here. By that he meant it's easier to understand somebody with a Durban accent than somebody from Liverpool, Newcastle, Glasgow. And actually, one or two of our clients may have been called by one of our staff in Durban, and you would not even have So that's worked for us. Obviously, a bit too expensive for them to come to the Christmas party. None of them visit any clients, but other than that, we've got a good little team.
An amazing excuse to have time away from your kids. But no, I think, as Alvin said, there was a limit to obviously how many. 18-year-olds we can whip into shape at any one go, and recruitment in the UK can be hard sometimes, depending on what you're looking for. So it's worked really well for us. But obviously, part of that strategy is then also looking inside your organisation to identify your invisible heroes. I mean, I think we all know our shining stars, because they generally shout about it, finding opportunities to tell us how well they're doing. But you do get your invisible heroes. So it's about looking for those, worker bees, beavering away, and just really trying to hone in on what's in it for them, because obviously each person is different, motivate, really trying to put yourself in their shoes about what they enjoy about working for the company, how they might like to develop. I think sometimes we don't necessarily ask our team about the additional skills they feel they can bring. And as I said, find out what motivates them, because I think we're all motivated differently. I think there's always an assumption that salary increases is what motivates a lot of people, and I know obviously that rising costs of everything that has been a driver, but I think also it's the incentives of bonuses, looking at competition. I mean, I certainly know the office I sit in within A4G, there is a competition about absolutely everything. Diary management, who's in on time, how many drinks we make, and who's the buy treats.
Yeah. Who have you known Luke at our office? Yeah, you know Luke, yeah. So Luke will turn anything into a competition, kind of. So
yeah, highly sporty, highly competitive. Yeah. So, but it's brilliant. It creates a lot of fun in the workplace, and actually, doesn't mean buying treats and bringing cakes a lot, but it is good fun. Obviously, a lot of people like the security of work, so actually talking to them about how the business is progressing and how you see them progressing, and that does provide security. And sometimes recognition of small little promotions or additional roles means people don't stagnate within your organisation. And obviously offering them the opportunity of learning new skills all the time. So our team at A4G, the accountants, do a lot of professional training, but we often speak to them about the softer skills, the personal skills, communication and management side, and pushing them forward. So there's lots of brilliant online courses and things for you to help develop your team at a relatively low cost. And then obviously do the boring stuff. Now, what do we mean about doing the boring stuff? Now, this is the bit that is highly important but not urgent. It is, as a business owner, really working on identifying all the roles that exist within your business. Now, I think if you have no roles within your business, the easiest way to start, I always think, is with a pack of post-it notes and jotting down all the things that you are not the only person that could do that. And then it's a really good exercise to stick those all on the whiteboard and start putting them into categories. Like that's admin, that's marketing, and that's how you can start identifying, designing roles within your business. So that might then start to look like this. You've got a head of admin premises. And under that, you've got things like health and safety, premises, cleaning, admin, receptionists and secretary. Now, they don't all have to be full-time roles, they may be only a certain hours a week. But actually, as part of designing those roles, it also makes it a lot clearer for the staff member to know what's expected of them and for you to be able to manage them. So I think we do write really good job adverts, but never get you to manage staff. And then it always becomes a personal conversation. I don't think you'll necessarily do what I need you to do, but they don't really feel they've got a clear purpose. So when we go about dealing with types of roles, we have roles that we call multi-roles, which is where there's tasks to do, but there's no responsibility in terms of managing the overall flow of work. So that's a multi-role. So it's a pool of work shared out between a group of people. And it allows you to allocate things to who's available. And then you have primary roles. And that's a role where it must only be one person doing it. Otherwise, who's responsible? So I think we probably all have roles within our organisation where someone should be responsible, or a couple of people share responsibility, and things still fall in the gap. Because I thought he was going to do it, he thought I was going to do it, and it actually didn't get done. So primary roles are absolutely key to start developing roles, and they're also really good buffers for keeping things away from coming up to you. And then you're looking at identifying, systematising as much as possible, so the 90%, so you can humanise the 10%. So the systematisation often starts with sort of checklists and procedures to make sure that, you know, if you're doing a task, once it is consistently done in the same way.
So, any of you read the E-Myth Revisited? Good, yeah. So this has sort of become the A4G Bible really. So the E-Myth, the entrepreneurial myth, is that people run businesses, whereas in most cases they just work in business that they also run. And so it was about 12-hour read, which will tell you everything you need to know about systems. Lots about Lady Sarah and but the whole mindset, systemise the 90% so you can humanise the 10%, has become really important at A4G, because one of the main things we get told when we take over a client is that the previous advisor didn't return their calls, didn't deal with stuff. And I understand why that hasn't happened, and that is because that person is drowning in tax returns and accounts and just that admin that should have been systematised and pushed down the organisation. Then they haven't got the time to deal with the human bit, you know, the problem that has arisen that day, the strategic planning for the future or whatever. So our mantra is always systemaise the 90% so you can humanise the 10%. And the key thing to any system, the first thing you must do is identify who is responsible for that system. You can have the best systems in the world, but if nobody knew that they were responsible for operating that system, then it's not going to work. And we had, I thought I knew all about systems until about 20 years ago when one of our juniors had recommended his next door neighbour to come in for a meeting because this guy needs an accountant. And ironically, this guy's name was Mr. Cross, which turned out to be quite prophetic, really. And he came into the office, and the system was got after tea, and the person he was coming in to see was on a phone call. One of those long phone calls with those clients that has long phone calls. And our three people that sat on the front desk, nobody took responsibility for just going and sticking a note under my colleague's notes to say client's in reception, or actually saying to the client that was the potential client that was in reception, I'm ever so sorry, but he's just trying to wind up a phone call. And after 15 minutes, Mr. Cross was got up and walked out. So, now my response to that was to kind of go to the three people, well, why couldn't anybody do this? Why didn't you do this? Right? And actually afterwards I thought, the reason was because I was expecting one of them to do it, but I needed it to be just one person. So we have a role called office receptionist, and Miss Hannah here, she's up there. So when Hannah's in, Hannah's our office receptionist. When Hannah's not in, somebody will deputise. So there's always one person responsible for that, looking after anybody that's coming. The funny thing was, the day after, I don't know my little paddy bag, we reckoned about 6 people asked to somebody on reception if they were okay. They just thought it was really bad. So, but now, that element runs like clockwork. So the next thing is that you must specify why that task is being done. And that's what's the purpose of it? What are we hoping to get out of that? So in that particular case, to ensure that any potential clients are aware of delays or whatever it is, every single task has a purpose. If you don't tell the person who's going to do that task what the purpose is, then they won't be able to deal with anything slightly out of the normal. The next thing is to understand the trigger. When and where does this all begin? This task takes place on every Monday morning at 9 a.m. That might be the trigger. Or this task takes place after receipt of an email from a client requesting their audit. Or whatever it is. You've got to think where the start point is. Now, how do I undertake this process? So literally a detailed list of systems outlining how you do. So Disney has 4 days induction, even if your job is to pick up litter. Disney go through every single system that you work on. McDonald's has them to just a hamburger list. So, and every step is detailed. And then what comes next? Who do you then pass in that on? So the next step process. So this is a page from the book, which is just a pro forma of a standard system that sets all of that out. So if you have a copy of the book, you can just steal that to design a system. The stage after getting the systems done is to think about automation. So automation, there are a few different ways you can automate. First thing will be to buy an off-the-shelf piece of software that does all the things that otherwise you're going to have to do. Maybe, if the software is designed in the right way, you may be able to design some bespoke add-ons. There's some very clever database developers that can do that for you. Perhaps, if your budget is big enough, you might be able to get a piece of software that's specifically written for you. And all of these things are automating what you would otherwise have to do in a laborious step-by-step process. And of course, the last thing is to think about artificial intelligence, and I'm sure at some point in the next 2 years we might be doing an event on that, because that's a subject in itself. If it's not big in your industry now, it's going to be big in your industry in the future. So the next bit of doing the boring stuff is to create central data points. I've been in clients' offices where there are just loads of business cards pinned up on a notice board. I've played golf with somebody once where the first 9 holes he must have taken 20 phone calls, and of course the golf was terrible. 5:30 ticked by, the phone stopped ringing, he played amazing the back nine. He was the central data point. Nobody could find any information out without calling him. So the keys to this are to create a central paperless filing system. We went paperless in 2003, which seems like an extraordinarily long time ago. To get some really good CRM software, customer relationship management, where all the information about your customers, what you do for them and how you do it is stored in there. Create some internal protocols about accessing and updating that data, because if you don't do that, then that central data point is useless. And the next thing that we can start to do is, if we put all that in place, we can start to head towards the light. Now, by that, I mean the light at the end of the tunnel, not the light for the end of our days. Now we get into what we really want to get out of this. So that means to start walking through some key processes. Now, what I mean by that is just think about a key process within your business. That could be something like a sale to a new customer. Where does that begin? It might begin from a referral from another professional. It might begin from a customer walking through your door. It might begin with a website. Just think about where that begins, and then look at the points where it passes from one person to another. They're the friction points within your business. If something takes 4 days to happen, then you lose the customer, right? So you've got to work out how you ensure that the information is passed on quickly and the next person in the chain does what they're supposed to do. Consider the changes to each person's process that will make it easier for the next person to do what it is that they need to do. If you're going to be the one that is catching the rugby ball, you want to make sure that the other person is throwing it to you in the right place, right? So again, you get dysfunctional systems where both people think that what they're doing is right, but actually they don't work together. What the first person is doing is not done in the way to make the second person's job easier. And just keep walking that process right the way through until the very end. The very end is normally payment, or maybe it's non-payment. Now, I've often said that within our credit control part of the business, they can give the best feedback about our systems, because if there's a reason that somebody's not paying their invoice, then that's probably something that has occurred earlier on in the process that we should be trying to fix. So a walk-through process is often walking in one direction and then going back a few steps and fixing something and then carrying on and getting that system slicker and slicker. So the next part of heading towards the light will be is the importance of leadership. What I mean by that is that good leadership means that your team will do the things that you want them to do in the way that you want your business to do them, even when you're not there. So that means that your principles and values need to be understood by all of the team. And that's critical. You may be running that business because you want to make a profit, you want your family to have a good lifestyle, but that's not, for the other person, it's their job. So they might not understand all the things that have got your business to where it is. You want to encourage them to make decisions based on those values. The success of the England cricket team in the last 2 or 3 years has been about not attributing blame when things go wrong, as long as the coach just wants people to make the right decisions. If it doesn't always work, it doesn't always work. But the team are making decisions out on the pitch based on the values of the coach.
One of my fastest growing clients actually has their values on the wall. So customers can see it, staff can see it, and it's just that reminder. Because quite often they're mentioned in the induction, and that's where they get left. So I would really highly recommend that. So then, obviously, you've done all the wonderful things. You've got a bit more time to think about what you want from the business, and you might want to start thinking about exit strategies that would suit you. So one of the good exit strategies can sometimes be a management buyout. Now, obviously, your team are well placed to understand your business, and they've already got some of the relationships with customers. They've also got the industry knowledge to understand how those businesses operate, the type of competition you have, some of the challenges you face. And obviously for customers, there's a seamless transition. So it just avoids any big upheaval. And actually sometimes you see in some sort of big PE acquisitions, they make the point to not transition individual businesses for a while, because they don't want to upset clients and have a big exit at day one. So a management buyout is seamless, but also it can be done over a period of time. So it could be something you build into your growth strategy, is, you know, motivating your senior team to sort of buy in and grow the business. Sometimes some of the disadvantages, it might mean you're unlikely to get the best price depending on the other buyers that are there in the marketplace. And I would say typically, unless the management team are prepared to raise a lot of funds up front, it tends to be less money up front and more deferred consideration. And I think for a business owner, you can sometimes worry about what if that doesn't work, what if the business starts deteriorating, and will personal relationships be damaged as a part of that? You know, does your relationship as now exiting owner become a bit fractious with the new management team? But the way a management buyout would typically work is the management team would set up a holding company. The holding company then buys the shares in the trading company. The reason for that is then you're not paying a significant amount of tax on repaying borrowing or funding the purchase. And then the owner pays 100% of their capital gains tax at the point of sale. So sometimes you see this on the run up to tax changes as well, where there's suddenly a quick management buyout to kind of lock in on the business asset disposal relief. The trading company then pays regular dividends out of profit to the holding company, and there can be restrictions on sort of no further dividends are allowed until the repayments to the owner have been settled, and the holding company pays the capital to the former owner. And sometimes you can build in interest to those agreements and caveats about, you know, payment holidays, or also the ability to take back shares if there was a problem.
So the second type of management buyout is what's called employee ownership trust. Now this was something that the Cameron government, the coalition government brought in to encourage employee ownership in businesses. And the features of this, the way this works, is that a trust is set up to benefit the employees, and 75% of the shares in the company must be sold to a company which is owned by that trust. The trust then appoints some directors to run the company, which are presumably the senior management team already, but may well be somebody else that has been brought in at the time. And the remaining 25% of the shares can be bought by other parties, including perhaps some of those directors, or maybe remain with the former owner. That's the features of employee ownership trust. Some of you may have seen recently that the shop, The Entertainer, has sold out to an employee ownership trust, and this chap here, Gary Grant, who has overseen its growth for many, many years, got extraordinarily fantastic publicity over this about what a generous chap he was for passing on the ownership of the business. And if you've read the reports, they do sound very much like he'd given it to the employees. That wasn't the case. He may well be, he does sound like a lovely chap actually, but there were some major benefits to Gary. The first one was that the proceeds of selling these shares to the employee ownership trust are tax free. So forget the 10% tax free. And often, some of the proceeds are actually money that's already in the business. So part of the sale price might be, well, we valued it at this much, plus the 10 million quid cash that's sitting in the business, which if I'd taken that out as a dividend, would have cost 3.9 million or whatever. So now I'm able to get all of that out tax free. Great publicity as well. It's a great story that will run. Nobody else other than accountants will actually understand how the ATs work, and obviously will do that. So it's fantastic publicity for the business. There's a little mechanism within there where tax-free bonuses can be paid to employees. every year. So we've got really good contact. We did a lot of shopping around for a client that wanted to do an employee ownership trust, and we've used a very specialist firm on this who are absolutely fantastic. Anybody that knows of any businesses that want to consider this, put them in touch with us. So the third type of management client is what I call the franchise arrangement. It's a lover of LLP, as this they can often be used as partners. Franchise is where the owners retain ownership of the original company, but a brand new company is set up by the management business. That could be a limited liability partnership or a limited company, and that company agrees to pay an annual fee to the old company, which is still owned by the original owners, for a fixed period of time for the use of its name, goodwill, trade, etc. And then there might be a final payment at the end of that agreement. So typically you might do like a 15-year agreement to pay this fixed fee, and then the former owners just keep the company, maybe eventually liquidate it or just take dividends out. So we really like the franchise arrangement, especially if the new business is a limited liability partnership, which has some tax advantages as a result of the last couple of budgets, and creates real flexibility within the management team to sort of do a deal with themselves about who gets what. The good thing about the franchise arrangement is we will call it's tax neutral. So the amount of tax that is paid by the sellers is pretty much exactly the same as the amount of tax that's saved by the buyers. So there's no horrible capital gains tax to be triggered. The next type of exit strategy, apart from management buyout, would be to give it to the next generation. And the old thing was, first generation builds it up, second generation maintains it, third generation ruins it. Now that doesn't always happen. There are many successful businesses out there where third, fourth, and fifth generations have taken on to greater heights. But that's not an untypical story. I've seen that myself. Do they actually want to take it on in the first place? It's the first challenge. If so, are they up to doing it? What if one child wants to buy it, the others don't? Lots of clients with some fairly complicated wills because one of their children took over the business without paying for it, so the others have got to be looked after. And then the last one would be a sale to a third party.
The only thing tricky about dealing with passing it to the next generation is I know I've been in meetings where sometimes it feels like I'm in the middle of a family argument. It's very personal, but I haven't got the apple crumble to sort of soften the blind. So, but then obviously some people would just look at sale to a third party. This might be where you consider you can achieve the most value. I think particularly if there are PE who are particularly, sort of private equity that are particularly interested in your industry at the moment. So you'd start by obviously considering finding a buyer. So I would say a lot of businesses approach us and say to us, oh, we're thinking about selling because they have been approached by one person. I always think the danger of being approached by one person is you can go quite a way down the process and either fall out about money or take a significant haircut on the price sometimes. So, but it could be someone you know really well. That could be a customer, that could be a supplier, someone that adds synergy to what you do, and they then gain an extra customer base to sell their products to as well. It might also be a competitor, and I know people are always a bit nervous about talking to competitors about things like this, but if it's done in the right way with the right non-disclosures, that can happen, and it can be approached by a third party so they don't know it's you. And I always think that's the perfect place to be sometimes, is annoying your competitors because they will give it to you. But it might also be someone we know, or it might be via a specialist broker. Now, There are a whole array of brokers. There's a number of people that refer to themselves as brokers and really they're advertising agents. So they'll just come up with value, chuck the business out, and you have to waste a lot of time with wasted conversations or people that haven't got capital to put down. A good broker, which is why Richard sponsored the event from House Suppliers, will actually do that homework for you. They'll weed out the rubbish. And then you look at obviously going to negotiations. Now, price is obviously a big consideration. Quite often people don't necessarily know what the price, the value of their business or what you might actually need in retirement. Sometimes you've got a figure in mind. And if you work with a financial advisor, you'll actually realise you've got more money in pensions or whatever than you thought, and you could actually retire earlier. So it is important to start understanding how your business is valued and the price you might get. The element of deferred consideration can be quite a sticking point. Obviously, the lock-in period of directors, which is why we always talk about considering it early, because there is typically at least one director who will be locked in for a period of time, up to 2 years. And I think if we get to a stage where that, now I've had enough, I want out, and then that period becomes a bit of a slog. There might be restrictions on what you're allowed to do next, and conditional elements to the price, which can sometimes work in your favour. If you've got a sort of profit element on the growth you can achieve in the period you're retained as the director, that can just help make that sort of earn out a little bit easier. So if we talk about price, it is most businesses are typically valued on a multiple of EBITDA. So EBITDA is earnings before interest, depreciation and amortisation. But it's not necessarily the figure that you bring to your accounts, because most of you are paid in a really efficient way, where you're paid a small salary and dividends don't form part of that figure. So we would always adjust the EBITDA, and that's part of the communication we have with our clients when we prepare management accounts, to put in a market rate salary for people that replace you in the business. And then you can really know what profits you are making in excess of that. And that is what the business will be valued for. Now, sometimes the multiple is driven by synergies between buyers and sellers, but as I said, depending on industry activity, private equity can sometimes really drive up the multiple if they're doing a lot of acquisitions.
Yeah, Andrew, we were talking about the importance of, in the negotiation process, of sort of getting a lot of those issues out before the lawyers have been instructed to prepare the sale and purchase agreement. And I guess you probably had a few situations where you get instructed to get the process started and they haven't actually agreed it properly. So, do you want to just stand up and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sorry. I'm Andrew Hawkins, I'm a partner in the corporate team at Warners. I'm here with Kevin, who's also a partner in the corporate team, Jessica, who's an assistant in the corporate team, and Louise, who's head of our employment team. We've got offices in Tunbridge and Sevenoaks, and we're a full service law firm, but I work particularly with Josh in your team on corporate and commercial deals. So, in terms of our experiences, deals, why they bought, it tends to be funding for the buyer goes or wasn't strong in the first place. Could be that following due diligence, either the buyer decided to pull out or their lender no longer wishes to lend to them for the purposes of the transaction. There can also be situations regarding legal, so you may not have well drafted customer contracts, especially for key customers whose revenue is so important for the business. If they can serve notice on change of control, then as soon as you complete, the buyer could run the risk of that customer disappearing, and then the value of business is just depleted straight away. Property-wise as well, if you lease the business from which you operate, lease the premises from which you operate, then it could be that the landlord refuses consent to the assignment of that lease, in which case the whole deal falls away again. If the seller owns the property but it's mortgaged, then you need consent from the lender to lease that property to the buyer. And again, if that's not forthcoming, then the deal's going to fall away. Could be that timetable's an issue for a number of reasons. So I've been involved in transactions where it's gone for 7 or 8 months because the seller hasn't got its act together before completion, or the buyer's not got its funding together, or it decides to change the funding structure halfway through, which is something that Josh and I experienced recently. Or it could be that you have difficult advisors engaged. We've worked on deals where lawyers are appointed on the buy or sell side and they have no idea what they're doing, and we end up educating them as to how to run a process. So that can also cause frustration between the clients. The last thing you want is for the parties to fall out at completion, especially if they're working together going forward. And then last thing is, if the negotiations are really sensitive and neither party wants them to get out into the public domain, for example, the staff might get unsettled if they feel a culture change because they know the corporate that's coming in, breaches can happen. Even if you sign a non-disclosure agreement or sign up to heads of terms with confidentiality obligations in them, news can get out. It's a small world. It could be that the receptionist husband works for a supplier and he finds out that has happened on the deals I've been involved in, and then the parties decide they can't go forward any longer. So what can sellers do to avoid that? Well, just get organised early on. Spend a few months you have before you look to exit, getting all your documents in place, getting well-drafted commercial contracts in place, well-drafted employment contracts in place, because all that will just add value to your business and give the buyer confidence that it's buying a well-run, well-organised business, and it shouldn't have anything to worry about. Heads of terms are important because they can keep parties focused on the terms that they've agreed in principle. And yes, there might be a price adjustment later on, but that's only if your financials aren't going to be what they should be, which is why you instruct APG to be your accountants. Right?
Thank you, Andrew. It's absolutely right. It is important to do a lot of preparation work before selling. And as I said, multiple buyers, but knowing your numbers, having confidence in the growth of the business. I think sometimes sales can be distracting and those negotiations can be tricky, and that is where a good accountant, a good solicitor can come in and almost be your slightly stronger voice. If we need to play bad cop, we do, or that, I would say, firm cop in terms of knowing the value of your business.
She's good at that. Thanks. Yeah, so as Andrew said, I think the main message for what Andrew was saying was involve the lawyers early, involvement in the negotiation stage. But once you've got those negotiations sorted, you're then talking about potentially a 100-page, that's about typical, isn't it? 100-page SPA
plus.
Sale and purchase agreement plus, plus appendices and so there's a lot in there that can suddenly require negotiation, and we've kind of moved on from the everyone's friends stage to now. This is the nitty-gritty haggling stage of things. One of the big things, we will always get asked about tax warranties, but there will be warranties for all sorts of things. So there will all the sort of things that your buyer will be worried could be a problem in your business will find its way into the warranty, even if you know that it isn't a problem in your business. It can take months, many hours of your time, and when Andrew told that story, I always love telling the story of one of my clients who ran the sale process like some kind of secret service operation. Nobody within the organisation was to know anything. And then one day, when he was the last person in the office, his cleaner said to him, "Oh, I hear you're selling." And basically, everyone in the business knew that he was selling, but the cleaner was the only one that didn't know she wasn't supposed to know. So and he still doesn't know for certain how But it can take many months, it can take months and many hours, during which typically the performance of the business will dip because you've taken your eye off the ball a little bit. And of course, the buyer will use that as an opportunity to try and push the price down. Occasionally you get buyer's remorse, so they're all enthusiastic about it at the time, they get into the process, and now they start to think about the problems they're going to have in taking you over, and they start thinking, oh, perhaps I'm paying a bit too much for this, and deals will go wrong during that time. Sometimes we get seller's remorse as well, great story, clients of mine, neither with us anymore, sort of summoned me to a meeting at the house to talk about selling the business. We spent an hour and a half talking through all the practicalities. The lady at the house said, like another cup of tea, Malcolm? That'd be lovely, should I get some biscuits as well? As soon as we were out of earshot, he leaned over to me and went, of course, we would get under each other's feet, you know, if like stuff the business. And I kind of looked at him thinking, I don't think you actually wanted me here to talk about how to sell the business. You wanted to come up with all the reasons for not selling. And so people will, you know, you might change your mind, you might think that there's not enough money in the deal for you. Sellers, and I guess buyers as well, suffer from deal fatigue. It's gone on for so long that they just had enough of that. And as I said, that drop in performance as well. So, the deal gets done. Now we need to deal with the aftermath of things, and I'll let you talk about all the stuff that can go wrong.
So, yes, the aftermath. So you can get disputes over interpretations of key terms. I think Andrew would say that legal documents are quite difficult to read, aren't they? Even I find I can work myself through them so many times at a time. But obviously everyone's understanding can be different sometimes as well. Difficulties working together. Obviously, some people have, depends on how much money is in growth consideration, probably depends on how much you're willing to hold your tongue. A bit of a loss of direction for the business and for the owner if they're still working in there a bit. I think it's important to manage that and ensure retention of staff and customers. So that should always be built into the earlier strategy of how this works going forward. Maybe renewed direction and drive. As I say, I've always seen businesses where if they've got growth consideration, there can be a real buzz after sales. It's like, actually, we've been given some, you know, sometimes quite difficult targets to achieve, but as a team, we're all going to achieve those. But the beauty of doing the things that we've talked about in terms of being a little bit more modelled means you won't necessarily be in a desperate position to sell when you get to a point that you don't want to be working the hours you're working now. The idea being is that actually, as you're building this business that has value, you are also building your freedom and winning back some of your time, which is hugely valuable. So you might find that you get to the end of it and you're happy to do a couple of days a week or a few mornings as an advisor, but actually the team you've got in place, and that might be some of the management team who thought you put percentages out, or, you know, that they can run it without you fearing that, you know, you walk out the door and everything's going to go wrong. So I always think that puts you in a really good position if you look at sell, because you're not desperate to sell, you've got options. So how can A4G and our sponsors help? We look at things like strategic sale planning, and that might include looking at your personal wealth that you've got outside of the business and how much you would actually need for the rest of your lifetime. And quite often it's less than you think. It's actually starting that process of understanding how your business is valued, what your business, you know, what it is worth now, and where you might like it to grow to, and what profit targets you might have to set to achieve that. Looking at maximising the sale price, as Andrew talked about, you know, really doing that due diligence with the legals, getting together good financial information, starting to think about due diligence. contracts of employment, job roles, makes it much easier for someone to take over managing your team. And as I said, we can act as an intermediary between buyer and seller. So I did get kicked out of a meeting by a broker, but in my view, that's because I was doing my job right. I was protecting my clients with some right terms. So thank you. So A4G is our 30th year as a practice. So to help us celebrate, we do have a selfie frame that Amanda got harassed you with. So if you can take a picture and tag us with A4G turns 30, and you get a chance to put on lovely to help celebrate with us. Feel free to book in a consultation with one of our principal advisors to speak to them about your client files already, looking at business valuations or how they might be able to support your business. We always say we're offering clients second accountants where they're starting to get into that growth phase and they need someone with a bit more direction about where the business is heading. And sometimes hold them accountable to their own ways. We'd like to say thank you to our sponsors, Warner Solicitors, thanks guys, and Harris Suppliers. It's an absolute pleasure to work with professionals like that. So as I said, there are all our details, phone numbers, inquiries, website. And please make sure before you leave you do fill out the feedback forms. We are keen to continue putting on events that people find useful, so it's good to get some feedback, and I understand some of them. So thank you. We are going to stick around for a bit. We're going to go around in the other room. There will be comments. So feel free to let. And if you need to put one to one, it's an